Hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Well, maybe evening now, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to see so many of you here for this evening's event, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be a very interesting hour that we'll spend together. I begin as we always begin in the University of Melbourne with an acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and we acknowledge the elders past who for over 1,000 generations have been making art and making their culture that we've inherited, and they give us permission to join them in the future of making art on this land. So tonight, I know this is billed as a Dean's lecture. I guess that's so people know the kind of context of it, because other faculties have Dean's lectures which are actually lectures. But of course, we're different here at VCA and MCM. Tonight is really a conversation. And the person we're talking to tonight is one of those individuals who insists upon doing something else during the conversation. Because tonight, Zachary is actually going to use this extraordinary instrument we have here in the Federation Hall and play for us, which is very relevant given who Zachary is, where he came from to join us here in Melbourne a few years back. He began, in fact, with one of these things, maybe not quite as big as this one, when he was very young. And indeed, since 1990, as he reached his kind of formative years, he did, I think even Zachary would, we can check on this, would see his future as being a concert pianist. And such was his talent when he was very young, and such was his hard work and good teachers, that he would have had an international career if that's how things were to be. But alongside music, a growing development, which is what we're going to talk about, in other things. So tonight is a conversation with Zachary Dunbar about the duality of his life, or maybe more than a duality, the range, the plurality of his life, beginning in a professional sense with music at a very high level, but then moving into other things. His interest will be revealed if we follow the conversation. But it, in a sense, this is not rehearsed, and I hope that's not a detriment to our conversation. We're going to hear Zachary play, in fact, quite soon, because the format, which was what Zachary wanted to do, was to play 3 times during our time together, and always the same composer, and we'll investigate that in a moment, as a kind of philosophical and musical context to have our conversation. Zachary, welcome tonight, and really enjoying the possibilities of the next little while together. So what are you going to play tonight, and what indeed is the first piece you're going to perform for us, and why did you want to join the conversation with music?
So one correction first, there is something that's been rehearsed, and that is actually the piano performance. So the conversation is absolutely spontaneous. This whole thing, I think, is really about 2 things. One is, occasionally I get very nostalgic for coming back onto the stage, and it's been about 7 years. And so I thought this would be a very, very good reason to get back into the saddle, and practice. But the other thing, really more importantly, is I kind of wanted to make this a demonstration, a kind of an interdisciplinary process, and I think we'll talk about what that term could possibly mean. Through a performance, that is, to sort of try to demonstrate and reveal what a musician does when they rehearse music, and how that has a common ground to what actors do when they interpret text. So it's interdisciplinary in the sense that I'm trying to find the value in the embodied knowledge I have as a pianist that actually has some kind of transferable value to when I do some actor training and directing. So that's what this is about tonight. Why Liszt? I mean, it could be any music. Look, musicians and actors are illusionists. They have to do things that are fictional. And Liszt is one of these composers who's the ultimate illusionist. He basically composed music that transcended the very physics, you could say, of what the piano could do. And so these pieces I've chosen do that in two ways. The first two pieces, these sonnets of Petrarca, based on poetry by the Renaissance poet, is the illusion that the piano is singing, that it has the whole gamut and range of its poetic, timbral, and rhetorical qualities. And yet all we have is 30 tons of pressure on the strings and just basically a hammer hitting a string. So with my entire being, I need to be able to convey the illusion that actually there's a human voice up here singing fully the poetic meanings in that poetry. The other one, the Wagner Liszt, is Liszt's transcription of the opera, Tristan and Isolde, the penultimate aria. And in that case, it's the illusion that an entire orchestra is actually up here. And how does one create the color on the piano to create, this entire complexity? And apart from that, how to kind of simulate a kind of cathartic effect, or, well, orgasmic effect, actually, on the piano. So it's these two great illusions that Liszt sort of brings to bear in this romantic repertoire. So that's kind of...
And obviously, as we'll talk after you played this first piece, I'll be intrigued to think about how what we want to talk about, as it were, what we want to think about tonight is this: what is interdisciplinary? What does that mean, and how has it happened, and why does it happen? And I think that it's very interesting that how we're going to begin, not only with music, but this particular music by this particular composer and these particular pieces.
Great.
So
okay,
please.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So what I'm going to do is just demonstrate maybe two or three things out of the piece that can kind of give you an insight of the way I prepared this and what are the challenges and strategies I used to try to deal with some of these issues of creating the illusion of a voice. And when I learned this when I was 15, it was one of the first pieces I learned with my new teacher, and I thought it was rather simple enough what he was asking me to do. Because in the very opening, just a little bit about the sonnets. Petrarch, of course, was obsessed with a woman named Laura. And this first sonnet is a kind of more ephemeral expression of that love. Laura's a kind of angelic being out in the heavens. So it has a very transcendent quality. And you'll notice a lot of the music's very gossamer, very light. Most musicians will know piano or even triple piano, which is almost, unearthly. So the opening here is to kind of establish the atmosphere of this unearthly being. And Liszt gives us this kind of nebulous quality. And he adds some kind of harmonic bottom to it too. Which creates the atmosphere. I think we get the sort of nebulous kind of feeling. However, there's a third thing that needs to happen, and this is the kind of challenge to this, because he asks you to reach over and to express this kind of pulse of a voice. That. So three things are going on. Now, when I was 15, I thought that's easy enough. I just play this bottom, and I make that sing. Fair enough. But as one grows older, of course, these images and feelings will ripen and ask you to do something a little bit more about them. So the problem is this, and I'll get to why this means something to an actor, is that I have to use weight, I have to use projection, I have to use speed, and I have to use breath, all physiologically happening up here that you don't know about, to convey that sound out here. So, for instance, if I come into heavy, I'm already too much. If I don't breathe and start the breath, and then midway in the breath, if I don't time it there, it's not going to happen. At the same time, the speed of me reaching over to touch this note has to be timed just absolutely perfectly in terms of weight. So all these things that I have to think about just to create this little illusion of clouds and Laura's little pulsing eyes in heaven, requires what Stanislavski would call psychophysical work. There's psychological aspects and physical aspects going on. So I haven't lost anybody on that yet, have I? Okay, good, fantastic. I see the actors going, yeah, I know. So in general, it's what actors really have to do to a sense of radiating and projecting and understanding weight and physiology, because in fact, if they don't get the weight right in their body, if their gesture moves a bit too fast, it already throws off, in a sense, the acceptance of the character and also the atmosphere the character wants to create, even with the very first gesture. So that's kind of, that and other aspects of this piece evoke, again, ways, physiological ways and psychological ways of making that work. I mean, I could spend a whole hour and show you what I'm going to do, but of course you'd rather hear me play than the last thing I will say is at the very end, there's a kind of disappearing act, and I think actors will know what I mean by this, that in fact when you get smaller and smaller in stage, you have to get bigger and bigger in your energy. Yeah? And you'll see that kind of idea where this repetition of a note has to sort of disappear, but at the same time has to linger the longest at the very end. So the paradox of this kind of physiology is very strange. But in any case, all these things are going on up here as I'm playing. But I'm going to turn off my mic so you don't hear my breathing and movements and thinking as I play. So I think, if you can, I think it's muted. Okay.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
It's hard to talk after that. I'm in a quandary because the music is so beautiful and so interesting, and you performed it in such a spectacular and beautiful way. I want to talk about that. But I suspect if we don't quickly talk a little bit about you, we may never do that, which I think it's just you've had such an interesting life. So in a fairly, if we can do it fairly succinctly, how did you get from when you first started playing the piano to being able to perform with such insight and maturity? You know, this is going to be a really quick biographical grab here. So you were born in well, for me, an unexpected place in the sense that the way you came to us with your academic qualification from the US and the UK. But you weren't. You didn't begin life in either of those places.
Well, I started in the Philippines, and I should say, particularly for the musicians in the group, my upbringing was incredibly unconventional in the sense I hated to practice. In fact, it's probably conventional. I hated to practice. I would ride my bike for days before my mother would, with a newspaper would bop me over the head. So I think from 7 to 11, I sort of took lessons, but I learned by rote. In fact, the teacher just sort of showed me how to play, which was not very good if I was going to enter into the concert career because, not being able to sight read at 15 was pretty difficult. So it started then. My mother played the piano, and she had 5 children, so she thought, well, one of you's got to be talented. So, and so I kind of stuck to it.
Where were you in the 5?
The middle child. So the one that, the diplomats supposedly. I was also the tallest one, so it was easy to find me among the 5.
But we have to mention here your father.
Yeah. So because I mentioned my father was an All-American basketball player, and but at 5'10", which was kind of remarkable. It's very small, but he could shoot from way out. I mean, he was a remarkable, jump shot person. But then we left the Philippines because of martial law was declared, and we basically lost all our business and everything, and moved to Kansas City, Missouri, where my father's from. And from there on to about 14, we really moved around a lot, and I didn't really continue, with instructions. I mean, I sort of became an autodidact. I kind of went to the local public libraries and picked up, Gershwin or whatever was available, and really continued. Did
you have an instrument to play during this period?
Sometimes I didn't, and it was not through the gracious generosity of friends of the family in Florida, where we finally settled, who bought me a piano. I think this would not have happened.
Yeah.
And then from there, I thought we also had quite a privileged life in the Philippines, and things kind of went the opposite direction in the U.S. Usually it happens the other way around, but not in this case. And as a result, I thought, well, the only way to get a college education to get out of this situation was through a scholarship, through piano. So it was actually through a necessity that I started to practice really rigorously. But at the same time, I started to suddenly, latently love music. So really, not till 15, I would say, all right, there's the career ahead of you.
Was music for you a kind of an escape?
I think it was, yeah. And I think for most musicians would probably say in that kind of oasis that is, the art form of music or music making, that's where they find their solace, their depth of understanding or their worldview, as it were. And I think because what we were going through domestically, I think it then became the...
Yeah, I used to like to play from light to dark, from 4:30 till 6 o'clock sometimes. I don't know if that was one of your things to do.
No, I still didn't like to practice that much. But I think once I got a teacher also who generously offered me lessons free at 15. And because of that, because of the sort of responsibility of somebody giving you free lessons, I thought, well, you've got to commit now to the art form.
And so so we'll rapidly move through high school, but obviously your talent showed itself more and more, and so from high school you were offered...
Then I went to this college, which is this college in Florida, a liberal arts college, and that's where the interdisciplinary bug actually hits, because it was a liberal arts college, and of course I was hungry for other kinds of training and knowledge. And though I was training in a conservatoire fashion, the liberal arts setting actually allowed you to, take anthropology and take drama, and of course, that's where I discovered, in fact, I was hungry for other things.
This is a big plug for the Melbourne model, by the way.
Yeah, it can work. It can. And from there, I actually had a gap year after the 4 years. I had a scholarship to go to Salzburg, and I turned it down to the great...
That's really interesting, just for a moment. So, music became your inner escape, but also your outer escape to get where you... to something else. But then at the end of high school, you get this opportunity to go to one of the centres of music. By then, I presumably you realised that Salzburg was a pretty...
Well, after college. This was after...
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think, to be frank, I think I burned out.
Oh, right.
I mean, from 15 to 22, I just thought I had to have everything, and I think my brain just said, you need a break.
Okay.
And I think the drama and the things about theatre were starting to pull. I mean, I was starting to write plays and direct, and also do musical theatre. And I just thought, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm just going to need some time out.
So was the gap year filled? Was that gap filled by other non-musical, or at least things in the drama and theatre area, or not?
No, I mean, it was more like, basically pig farmer and and doing just all kinds of odd jobs, experiencing life basically. Okay. Yeah, and then I realized, I better, time is running out. Then I auditioned for Yale, and then I got in for 2 years, and then I studied at London. And in London's again the time this sort of theatre bug hit me, because London, well, being an extraordinary capital of that genre, was really yanked me in that direction. So. Twain had to meet...
So there's a sort of oscillation between intense music, intense kind of... I mean, even though you say you don't practice, I suspect you probably had to practice.
Yes, I did, yeah.
And this yearning to go into other bigger things, and presumably emotionally driven a lot of the time.
Yes.
And so in London, I guess that was another sort of oscillation where you'd been in the musical area and then suddenly wanted to go.
Yes. I think this word oscillation, there's just moments of sudden radical, schism or something, I just had to resolve. I will say something, because we talked about this last week, and I did think a little bit deeper. Why, what's wrong with one discipline?
Yes.
What's wrong with just being, there's nothing wrong with it, but I think there's a kind of nature-nurture thing here. And I just have to say, I was thinking about my father and mother, and my father was a bit of a nomad, a bit of a wanderer, an ideas man. He always said sort of wanderlust. So, and my mother was kind of the product of a rags to riches father. So very nose to grindstone, very disciplined, very perfectionist. So I think in me it's just very horizontal.
A lot of people have parents who are relatively culturally similar anyway. Whereas there must have been a significant breadth of your mother's background, mother's culture, and your father's culture, and that probably gave that oscillation.
It did, but I think it was just their habits, sort of habitus of my dad just never sort of getting bored of an idea, then moving on. And he was an ideas man, and my mother just stick to. So I think this horizontal and vertical thing that you have to do when you're interdisciplinary.
So that's what I was about to say. So in a sense, the thing that you wanted to talk about tonight, which is this, the fact that you're in your life and in your thoughts, there is this duality, but there's also the crossing.
Yeah, the synthesis.
And I guess, is that embodied a little bit in the pieces you've picked tonight?
I think in these pieces, and you'll notice there's just a huge contrast. In fact, the second piece is even much more tempestuous in terms of the polarities. And I think the interdisciplinarian, if you call it, always aspires to a kind of wholeness, a kind of gestalt, a kind of these things coming together. But in a way, they elude you. So you're constantly wanting to synthesize synergy. So the impulse to do that means you have to border cross all the time. And so I think there's sort of like forces in these pieces that kind of, project that meaning.
Well, that seems a very good cue to go to the second piece, which I'm sure will keep us traveling in this interesting
keep
direction.
The interdisciplinary thought, I think that's
Right.
good. Okay, good. So if you've had a chance to look at the poetry of the next one, you'll see that it's just much, these sort of polarities of sensations, these unspeakable moments of joy and pain, of ice, and fire. I just want to again, talk about how this enriches my understanding in terms of what the actor has to do in a psychophysiological way. Because in fact, it asks you to do two very what's called oxymoronic things, which means two very opposite things. You notice in the poetry it's talking about fire and ice, this and that. In one passage, for instance, Liszt asks you to play the right hand, or the voice, in as full and as passionate way as possible. But at the same time, the accompaniment of the left hand is absolutely ethereal. I mean, how you combine this heavy, bountiful kind of passion at the same time, absolute lightness. It's one of these things that I know actors, where you sort of portray this sort of the anger on the outside, but on the inside, a total calm. It's sort of playing opposites idea. In a sense, physiologically, musicians have to do that all the time, sometimes at the turn of a coin. And it's at this passage, after the opening, you'll hear me, well, you'll just see it. I think you'll probably see when it happens. I might nod at you when it happens, but there it is. Otherwise, there's this other illusion you have to do, and musicians know all about this. I will play a chord here, and then after that, there's this kind of hairpin thing which tells me I need to get louder to the next chord. Well, how is it actually possible to do that? But you'll see gesturally, performatively, a pianist or a musician has to kind of believe that. And if I believe it, you'll believe it. And I know actors have mentioned that many a time in their craft. So anyway, this is the Sonnet 104. bit exhausting.
Yes, well, you little breather there, but you said something just before you played about why isn't music, why isn't that enough?
Yes.
And I suspect a lot of people in the audience like me saying, well, damn it all, if you can do that. And in a sense, the music you've selected and the music you've played and the way you've played it, if you forgive me, is incredibly emotionally but theatrical. It's a performance in beyond the kind of pianistic performance. It is a kind of form of theatre. Yes. Why were you, it seems, constantly drawn away to theatre when you had theatre in your hands and you could live that theatre? In other words, why the other art forms? And you've continued. I mean, I know that you've been very successful in that. Are very successful in terms of writing plays, directing plays, teaching people about the theatre and the range of theatre that you've been involved in, from I think Greek drama, or maybe even before that, but we've certainly talked about that, as most theatrical people do see it as all one huge, sort of all-encompassing trajectory, because it is now. When you do Greek drama now, it's now. It's not millennia. But come back to that question: why the duality? Why multidiscipline? If you can do it all in one discipline, why go to others?
Yeah, well, my therapist always asks that question, Barry. Look, Barry, it's just a question I'm probably going to go to my grave, probably thinking, why has this happened? I think if we think of it, I guess in terms of when you split an atom, the amount of energy that comes out of that, fuels so many different things. And I think there might have been a time in my life where my atom split. Yeah. And the kind of that energy just went into all kinds of directions, and I didn't ask why. I just said, well, there's a lot of things that I learned about music and that music nourishes that has somehow, generating creativity, pedagogy, process in other forms. So I think what I did is I just stopped stopping myself. I stopped asking the question why. And one would say, well, do you get more pleasure? I suppose being more polygamous with my disciplines, I suppose. But I think there's another aspect to this. The career of a musician is not the same joy as actually me playing at my own leisure. So I think that's what I discovered. In fact, I could not repeat. I mean, if you asked me to play this 2 concerts later, I would probably say no. I can't. I can do it. I think it's a little secret there, I think iteration. This thing that that was a moment that passed, and I'm off, like my father, off to something else. Yeah.
So in a way, the irony is, despite your obvious and presumably for a long time, since you were 16 or 15 or 12, you've had this ability to be that, the performer. But that involved a particular kind of art, a particular kind of performance, which is, in a funny sort of way, was narrowing. And I'm sure for many of us who just heard you play like that, it doesn't sound narrowing, but
try
inside
doing that
you,
every week, and then also having a concerto up your sleeve every. Yeah. I think I just couldn't. I didn't have the skill to do it. I also had a memory like a sandcastle, basically. I mean, I could never. I mean, I would learn something, it would go, in 1 week. So I think the pragmatics probably pushed me out of necessity into other disciplines and to explore those new worlds.
So that begs the other question. We're here tonight, we're talking about interdisciplinarity. We're trying to draw from you some of the things that are you now. And for instance, I know you have this both knowledge and passion for the musical, for the Broadway musical, for the West End musical. You've been involved in that. You've even, produced and written. And that is a kind of creative in the pure sense, whereas performance is a particular kind of creativity. But tonight, what's the message here for us? If you know it, I'll forgive you if you.
Well, look, I think what's the common ground in all this is that I'm interested in the performer. I mean, look, a person who performs in musical theatre has the same quandaries and challenges. I mean, apart from obviously singing as well, that you know, acting performers do, or performers who make theatre. I think I'm just interested in performance, or you know, what does it mean to train as a performer? And there's just so many common grounds in all that. I mean, repertoire, of course, will pull these different skills in their own direction. I mean, certain repertoire will call in certain tools, but I'm interested in actually some of the phenomena that is common to all that. So whether it's even playing jazz or even the act of creating text, you know, has musicality, has performance. Phenomenon, you know, embodied in that process.
And when you're teaching, and you've been very successful here, and I'm sure before you came to us, very successful as a teacher, and students talk about the fact that it works and it happens. How is that embodied in what we're talking about here? The oscillation, as we've called it, the ability to really knuckle down and do the hard bit, and then produce a performance from that. And then there's the other thing, which is the exploration, the what's out there, what can I find? Do you use that kind of oscillation in your teaching, or is that not so obvious?
I think, well, this idea of rigor and discipline, you know, what it takes to get, I think I'm very old school about these things, and you know, I kind of sort of inculcate that attitude as much as possible. So I think a lot of students find me a bit hard-nosed about these things. But I think more importantly is actually students bring it to me. I mean, most of them will be talking about musicality, or some of them might be talking, oh, this is the rhythm I feel. I mean, so I can kind of engage them in that position, and also show that there aren't really these clear borders in terms of being called an actor and a performer and a musician. I mean, when I teach Greek tragedy, I teach them as though they are musicians, these actors. They're instruments. They're walking, their bodies are instrumental of sound and movement and idea. So I don't say, oh, well, you know, we're going to do acting for whatever it is. And I'm not even sure VCA even, you know, sort of left that behind in terms of their understanding of teaching. So, you know, music enters into space, but I don't make it a big deal. I don't go, oh, by the way, I trained as a concert pianist, and so I know what beats mean. It's not that at all. I just think we meet in certain common ground when it comes to just the understanding of training, and also what you want to do in the performance, the rehearsal, you know, this idea of you have an ideal that you want to reach. Well, how do you train so that during the performance you optimize the things that you prepared?
I'm getting a feeling that, in fact, this is not about interdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary. It's not a plural.
Yes.
It's just a big one, if I make a sort of grammatical disaster. But you know what I mean? That in a sense, I get the feeling for you it's sort of not oscillation, but it's in fact a kind of continuum, and that the whether you're talking about theatre and what kind of theatre and what age of theatre, whether you're making new theatre, and likewise with music, it is all sort of connected. Is it possible for you to kind of react to that thought with other thoughts about how conscious you are of that, of everything being embodied in a centre? It
only becomes conscious when you are in research mode, and when you have to formalize that knowledge so you can disseminate it to somebody else so that they can understand what it is you're doing. And I think the word interdisciplinary, look, we understand it's actually got several usages. In fact, it usually generically describes somebody who's, you know, a polyglot, or somebody, you know, who can play violin, do 6 languages, fly a combat jet, you know that kind of individual. But in academic culture, I think it becomes a much more formal explanation of, well, what do you mean when you do interdisciplinary, as opposed to, you know, we talked about transdisciplinary, we talked about multi. I mean, what do these prefixes mean? But I think the academic culture kind of demands that formality. You know, where are your positions on this, so that we don't get confused about you.
Yeah. So I think that one of the things that I think comes out talking to people, and one of the great things we're doing here at VCA MCM is having to defend in a research university, a great research university, how we fit. And I think one of the ways we do that is by actually and then revealing that we reflect on what we do. I mean, I think most of the people who work now in this context And maybe artists have always done that, except that all you saw was what I call the manifestation, the performance, the reflection that gets you to that performance.
Yes.
In a kind of scholarly context, which is what we're in, and maybe that's the kind of point of difference about this faculty and what this faculty might have been 100 years ago, which was probably about the technique of playing the piano or acting or painting. That the interesting thing about the modern conservatorium, the modern art school, the modern film school, where because they're located either in or very close to universities, there is an imperative to reflect on things. And I think you've done that tonight, exposed the fact that it's not just learning the notes, even thinking about the emotions, it's also reflecting on the sort of philosophical impact and what it means. But the meaning of what's going on.
Yes, and Barry, this took many years. I mean, probably when I was a teenager. I mean, of course, it didn't cross my mind. Acting and music really is something. I mean, but I think it's this thing that it takes quite a few years to start to experience the kind of synergy, the kind of aha moments. You go, oh, wait a minute, that's a bit like what I've just seen in the studio work where somebody's doing some Laban work. Well, I know that a cellist will be told, with more weight this way, and how is the boy? And you go, well, it's really the same thing. And we probably just need to get more of these, all performers in a room, as it were, and exchanging this more rapidly and understanding that there's no kind of formal definition. I mean, in fact, disciplines by their nature are always becoming something. They're never fixed.
So the disciplines, if I may say, are where you begin, where you might end,
yes,
which it can be called
absolutely. And I think musical theatre probably of all the genres express that that very idea that, well, when you sing, it's about acting. When you act, it's about movement. It's this.
When you dance, and so forth.
Yeah.
Well, our dance is coming to an end tonight, and I thought, given that we began with music, it's very appropriate in a brief visit to your inner sanctum, and also exposure of your outer performance, that we would end with the last piece. Very interesting. It's Liszt, but it's Liszt, Wagner, yes. And indeed the piece itself is a kind of complex duality, as you've said already.
Well, I think we can bring up the philosophy about this because Wagner read Schopenhauer, and Schopenhauer said that the human condition was always this aspiring to be whole. I mean, aspiring to be connected to kind of larger ideal, but that there would always be this gap, that you would never, it's kind of very despondent, negative worldview. And I think the Tristan and Isolde, the opera, obviously is this kind of doomed love, and this particular penultimate moment is of course Isolde wanting to be in union, as it were, with the dead Tristan. So it's and Wagner experimented a lot with the unending melody, that it could never end. And you'll just see the transformation of this motif that starts at the very beginning, ad infinitum. But it's also a kind of catharsis. And the last thing I'll say about it that connects to acting is yesterday I had a very brilliant colleague who gave a wonderful confirmation, who's sitting in the front here, Draf. And he spoke about unleashing. And now, in a sense, we often ask actors to let go, after they've done a lot of rehearsing. Now, I've played this piece a couple of times, and it's treacherous. And if one really lets go, one is lost. I mean, it's truly, because it is actually a motor skill as well, and one needs to hang on. So in a sense, letting go is inversely proportional to how many times in the rehearsal room you actually experienced letting go. So it's like the trapeze act of the emotions. You have to practice that landing 100 different times so that in the performance, you actually jump into the abyss, but there are 100 different ways that will manifest your landing. So in a sense, I will let go at the very end, but I'm not sure quite how we're going to end. But you'll catch me, Draf. Okay.
Zachary's composing himself so that we'll kind of end with the music, which I think is very appropriate tonight. There's really one person I have to thank, because in a sense, there's one person who's behind this evening. And that's my wonderful, I have a life partner in Deborah, but I have a kind of another secondary work-life partner in Colleen, and she's probably out doing something, getting ready for us to have some refreshments and drinks downstairs. But I do want to publicly acknowledge the incredible amount of work that she did just on this project while doing lots of other things. So if you would join me in helping me thank Colleen for her work for this project.